This conference will now be recorded. This conference will
Good morning,
now be
everyone.
recorded.
Uh, this is Anthony. I'm part of medical strategy and solution team in Indigene. I have a background in genomics. Spent quite a lot of years in research on genomics. So I've been given 15 minutes, but drug discovery is a huge process and it's an ocean. Just give an overview of what's happening in drug discovery and the use of AI in drug discovery. So, what is the need for AI in drug development? That might be the first question, which when we think about um, drug development, how we can we use and what is the need for AI? If you see the three big boxes, normally we'll spend $2.5 billion to develop a single drug. So that is the cost involved in this. There's a huge cost involved in the drug development, and it takes 10 years or more to identify new candidates. This is huge because like most of the years we spend in identifying the right candidate or the right lead molecule to identify and then develop it and then test it. There's a huge process involved in it. And even after doing this, one out of the 10 drugs which we identify will fail in the phase one. So the probability is very tricky, and there is a huge challenge in the development of the drug discovery. If we see, it is a lengthy and a complex and a huge cost involved in this process, and especially in terms of molecular biology, because like most of the audience are from the data science field, I just want to touch upon from the medical side. So there are a lot of in terms of medical molecular biology, the success rate even with the research which we do is only 3%. So it's very difficult to identify. Even we, whatever in silico model we try it out, when the drug goes into the human system, the way it reacts, it's very difficult to monitor and identify. Um, the second, the other challenges are the heterogeneity of the patient population because it differs to patient population, and the human data might be there is a huge need for human data because like each genome is unique. As I said, even the fingerprints may be tampered, but the human genome cannot be tampered, and it is unique for each individual. There is there is a lack of validating diagnostic and therapeutic biomarkers in the system, which will detect like how it will be reactive inside the system. So the next is since most of them are from the data science, like I just want to touch upon the market size. If you see recently, the global AI in drug discovery market is projected around 1.4 million by 2024. All of a sudden, if you see, there are a huge rise around 40.8% of CAGR has been forecasted from 2019 to 2024. And there are 2030 startups using artificial intelligence drug discovery. Off late, there is a huge surge in huge hike in the startups using artificial intelligence in drug discovery. And recently, in 2018, there is $1 billion funding has been gone for the startups in AI drug discovery, and in 2019, if you see, it has increased to 1.5 billion. So there is a huge need, and there are a lot of startups coming up with innovative ideas in drug discovery, with innovative algorithms. Those are the important points we see from the drug discovery point of view. Artificial intelligence plays a very vital role. If you see the time taken for drug discovery, as I said, it takes 10 years to 12 years to bring in the drug. And in order to identify the drug lead molecule itself, it takes close to 6 years. And maybe in the later part of the slides, I'll say how one company has done within 45 days identify a lead molecule, and they have tested even in the lab condition, and it worked well. So these are the partnerships between pharma and the AI drug. If you see these, all these are the pharma companies, and if you see most of the AI startups, and it is not a well established. Like if you see, there is no IBMs of the world or there. Mostly it is all startups which are collaborating with huge pharma companies, and they are working really well. And if you see this Excentia in silico medicine, recently they have collaborated with GSK, and they have come up with a drug which has been approved uh, by the FDA for the clinical trial. So this is one of the recent news which it's like a cutting edge, and it is like very interesting story if you read about this, because normally when FDA is very stringent about drugs which has to be done in the clinical trials. I'll touch upon what is clinical trial maybe for people who are in from the data science background. Normally what happens when the drug is developed, um, from the drug discovery process, it undergoes a series of clinical trials. First, they try it in in vivo model in animal cell culture, and then they'll try it with animal studies where they use rodents and mice to check how the efficiency of that is. And the third part is with the human itself, they'll try. In order to do that, every step we have to submit the results to the FDA, and then we need to get approved whether it is ready for the clinical trial phase one. So the clinical trial phase one, there are three phases in which we'll try do it. The phase one will try it with healthy volunteers. Phase two with less number of patients, and phase three will be like there will be a lot of patients who by which the to which the drug has been tested out. And this part, normally from the molecular side, if you see any scientists from the scientific background, they'll immediately say whenever we work with all bioinformatics tools or drug development, they always ask a question whether it has been tested. Even if the drug molecule is developed in silico, and they show all the interactions, drug-drug interactions, all the even if the efficacy is the molecule is exact fit for the for the target, they first ask whether the molecule is tested in vivo or in animal studies. And even given FDA is very stringent about the drug approval, FDA has given an approval on a drug which recently, last month, they have given a drug which is ready for clinical trial and which has been designed by AI. And this is the drug development process. I'll just check with, I'll go with this, the center part. If you see drug development process, normally there is a target validation. If you see, it's like for easy understanding of for the data science people, it's like a lock and key model. Normally, the drug target is a lock, and the drug will be the key, where which we try it out with different keys to unravel whether it is fixing exactly as an exact match to the target. These are receptors in which this chemical molecule go and fit, and there will be a lot of simulation happen to make the key exactly fit with the drug target. If the drug molecule is not fitting properly, then we need to try with many simulation, permutation, combination, and then we will try with lot other targets, and then they'll develop with this key molecule. So this is exactly what we do. If you see, then testing already available with available keys. So they with a lot of available keys, and then they'll check what is the interaction between the target as well as the lead molecule. And then once you identify which molecule is the exact fit, then they design the perfect key. That is the de novo drug design. We need to deep dive into different types of drug design, and one type of is the de novo drug design. And once it has been designed, then we do the optimization of the structure for available keys with good fit. We'll check for the drug optimization and drug repurposing. Now, drug repurposing is a very key word. People started speaking about drug repurposing in terms of COVID. Like they tried not other molecule which has been used already existing molecules for the treatment of COVID-19. And once it is optimized, then we'll do for the testing optimized keys in vivo. That is where we do the preclinical testing. I'll go back to the slide where I can explain how AI will be taking part in this thing. Once the target is validated, before the target is identified, we'll have a lot of, we'll identify which is the target. For example, in molecular biology, we'll go into which pathway we can take if we touch upon one receptor, there is a cascade of reaction happens. There are very serious, the most common signal pathways or the receptors are GPCRs, G protein coupled receptors. The moment a molecule will come and sit on the receptor, it leads to a cascade of reactions. So first they'll identify which pathway to take or which is the target which we need to identify exactly, and then we should try to fit the molecule, the receptor into the target molecule into the receptor. Then we'll do a biological assay to identify whether the target is correct, and then we'll have the compound screening. This is where AI plays a very high role. We'll do a high throughput screening where we do the compound screening with a lot of molecules. We use supercomputers, and recently the latest news is they are using Summit, which is one of the fastest supercomputer in the world. They are using that to screen molecules to identify a drug molecule for COVID-19. And there is a repository called PubChem in NCBI. If you want to try it out, you can see there are a lot of chemical molecules which will be present. They'll screen a lot of molecules from there and try it out whether this compound from the screen will be the key and target will be is the lock. So these molecules, they'll try it with a lot of molecules and try to validate with the target, and then they'll identify the lead and identification. Once the lead molecule is identified, it will be optimized. And as I said, then we end up into the preclinical development, and then there is phase one where the human will be tried. Phase two, as I said, will be with the patients, and phase three will be multi-center trials where we'll have a lot of patients across the world. They'll try it with the drug. And after phase three, we'll submit to the FDA, and FDA will give an approval, and then we'll again do a phase four study where we do the post-marketing and surveillance. So in this process, like where we'll do AI, what is the role of AI in this? If you see this target validation itself, we can start. There is a benchmark compound set design, predict the target roles in the disease. So here, based on the historical data and with the genomic data present, we will predict the target's role in the disease. So what is the role of the target in this disease? If we target this receptor, what happens in the subsequent reactions? Whether this will lead to the in terms of, like, for example, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, RNA polymerase is one of the important protein which has to be stopped. So most of the drugs which is in place now are targeting the RNA polymerase. So this RNA polymerase will run on the RNA and it will synthesize the protein, which is the viral molecule. So most of the people try to target the RNA polymerase and stop this protein to not run on RNA and synthesize the protein. So they will check all these things. They'll predict the target's role in the disease, and then they'll design the in silico compound libraries. They'll identify the novel targets using computer-assisted drug designing. You might have seen homology modeling. Most of the bioinformatics tools work on that. And then they'll predict the druggability of the target, whether this target can be used. Once you predict the molecule, whether this can be used as can be developed as a drug. And then, as I said, they'll focus on most on the signaling systems. What happens to the signal transduction pathways? If you alter this target, what happens in the cascade reactions? Whether it is properly the signal transduction takes place or not. And this, I think everybody must have worked on it. Most of the data science people know about it, where we'll prediction of the structure activity relationship. Once we do the homology modeling, we'll find out about the structure activity relationship. And the important part is the ADME properties, where absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion and toxicity of the properties is what they'll be predicting in most of the places. That is one of the important part in terms of predict. When we do a in vivo or a clinical study, most of the drug has been tested for this, whether the drug has been absorbed properly, has distributed properly, it is metabolized properly, and whether based on the chemical compound drug life or the cycle period, it will check whether there is a excretion, how it is excreted, and the half-life period of the drug. Maybe I'll focus more on to this one. Given us, this is the AlphaGo model of the drug discovery. So everybody will have a question on AI. because of late everybody is speaking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and NLP, and whether is there any use of it. Everybody speaks on theory. Is there any practical use of AI, and whether there is any real development in AI? And this is the AlphaGo. I think most of the data science people know about AlphaGo, which has several times beaten the human intelligence and succeeded it. And they have collaborated with the company, this company called InSilico Medicine. They collaborated with the AlphaGo company, and they come up with an approach called generative tensorial reinforcement learning. Maybe we can deep dive in subsequent sessions. And they have combined this technology as well as with generative adversarial network. Normally, we tried with neural networks in terms of doing this. What they have done is they have did uh, this algorithm called generative tensorial reinforcement learning, and to design and validate new drug candidate. And the success part is they're done within 45 days. This is like a cutting edge and a breakthrough, especially in drug discovery. And they tried it in vivo and in silico, in vitro and in vivo assays, and they found 6 molecules which can be used, and that has been tested and it has been used for the clinical trial in this thing. If you see, they have tried it in, this is one of the receptor, DDRI1. This is called as Discordian Domain Receptor Family 1. And they tried it this one, and it is published in September 2009, Nature Biotechnology. People who are interested can download this article and work on this. I want to touch upon these things. If you see, they have identified the target, nominated, and generated, and they identified which target, all these things using this technology within 21 days. If you see, a traditional hit lead generation molecule will take 2 to 3 years. And this approach they can finish within 45 days. And this is one of the major breakthrough in drug discovery process. And they have done it in 46 days. And I have explained in this picture, this is from the Nature Biotechnology article. If you see target selection, they are used, they collaborated one app tech called Uzi, and they have identified this within 7 days. The reference compounds, all the kinase inhibitors, X-ray data, everything pre-processing within 7 days. And using this algorithm, they have trained the model, the structure generation, the functions, all these things has been done within 12 days. And from 30,000 structures to 40 structures, they have done using this algorithm within 2 days, and they have done the prioritization. So this is a real breakthrough. And what they have done is this has been tested and it has been approved in vitro and by the scientists. They tried it in mice, and they took all the 6 molecules and they tried it out. And this has been published in Nature Biotechnology. And this is like, for me, from the domain side, from the science side, if you see, this is like a breakthrough. If I see, because we have spent more, like close to 3 years to identify a molecule, and if they can do it with AI in 46 days, see the amount of time they have saved and the cost they might have saved. And the final slide, and for people who are interested, this is the link. You can go to this GitHub InSilico Medicine, where they have they explained in detail how they have done all those things. I'll stop here. And this slide explains like how they're done exactly. This might be more interested for the data science people, how they the scoring pathway has happened. They developed a small molecular discovery library, virtual screening, then deep learning, how deep learn transcriptional response scoring engine they developed, by which if you target a pathway in the transcriptional pathway, what is the scoring engine, and based on all these things they developed, and it has been published in each step has been published in different journals. People who are interested can read these publications. And Swayam?
Yes, great.
Yeah, I've
So
taken 20 minutes.
no issues. So maybe yes, what we can do, the question and answerings regarding the sessions, we can keep it at last, right? So we have other talks by the speaker as well. But this was very interesting, Anthony. Thanks for it. So basically, I believe this would have been given us a good understanding on how do we work with bioinformatics data, right? And what are the challenges and the advantages do we leverage using AI? So thanks for the session and showing us insights. Next we have with us Anushwa. So Anushwa will help us show light towards how is AI driving insights for this COVID pandemic, and how do we effectively make a decision in such scenarios. So Anushwa, over to you. Maybe you can share your screen and take it over.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Swayam. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, it is visible.
Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to reduce this GoToMeeting screen is appearing in front of me, which is blocking my view. I don't know how to.
You can just do F5 and it will take over the screen.
Hang on. Collapse. Yeah, works now. Good. Right. So, okay. So a very good morning. This is Anushwa. I'm a statistician by training, and I've done my doctoral research in mathematical modeling. I'm working with Indegene in product development and strategy for the last few years. And today I have this wonderful opportunity to share with you an overview on some applications of data science and AI in driving response to the COVID pandemic. To give you an idea of what's to come, we will start with a look at some key highlights and limitations of the current situation. Then we would move on to how the limitations are being worked around and what outcomes have been observed through the application of data science and artificial intelligence. Finally, we would be concluding with some key milestones that have been achieved through these applications and a wrap-up of the discussion. So, the COVID-19 outbreak is an unprecedented event and presents a very challenging situation. I'm sorry, here goes a drill. Well, okay, as long as you can hear me, that's fine. Just confirm that you can hear me, Swayam.
Yeah, you are audible, Anushka.
Yeah, okay. Well, Saturdays. Okay, so let's continue. The COVID-19 outbreak is, as I was saying, it's unprecedented. And it presents a very challenging situation because researchers know very little about the disease. It's only in real time that we are estimating answers to questions like what are the different ways it can be transferred between people? How long does it live on doorknobs or Amazon boxes, say? And also how much time passes from the moment the virus enters a person's body until that person is able to transmit it to someone else. So there are these and many other questions that are important to come to a reliable understanding of the COVID-19 infection. Data-driven predictive models and advanced technologies like AI and machine learning have been featuring in many key policy decisions around COVID-19, primarily due to the unprecedented nature of the situation, the many uncertainties about the disease and the way ahead, and the need to make informed policy decisions on how to best manage what is going to, the path ahead, actually. And states and cities are using predictive models to shape their health system responses as the virus is spreading in the community. On the other hand, researchers are using models to estimate important epidemiological characteristics of the disease, such as the incubation period, transmissibility, asymptomaticity, and severity, as well as the likely impacts of different public health interventions, such as social distancing, airport screening, travel restrictions, or contact tracing. In parallel, as continuing what Anthony was talking about, R&D centers are using AI and machine learning to get insights into the structure of the virus and also for the drug discovery process. So modeling the COVID-19 outbreak, as we can guess, is very challenging because we know very little about the disease. And we are dealing with a wartime environment where data is very limited, and there's a constantly changing landscape and a heavy dependence on assumptions due to the lack of precedence. The official statistics that come in are usually presented as aggregate data. For example, newly reported confirmed cases that are presented as an aggregate at the end of the day. And this data tends to be shared on a fairly limited basis, which restricts the scientific community's access to the data. And though such information is important in tracking outbreaks, it does not include the granular details of epidemiological information that is available across different platforms, such as, say, news outlets or official government health reports, or even social media. And epidemiological reporting standards and the format of the data vary considerably across platforms, and they contain varying degrees of detail, which makes automating data collection also pretty difficult. So, so many limitations. But then how does it work after all? Well, mathematical and computational models are ideal as forecasting tools and can provide situational awareness when we are lacking good data. Or they define counterfactual scenarios that help evaluate the impact of medical interventions and public health policies. The data on which much of the research is being carried out now has actually come through a crowdsourcing approach, where an international team of volunteers are curating the data sources by hand and compiling the data in a standardized format. This format presents epidemiological data at an individual case level, which allows the extraction of detailed information on case demographics, travel histories, and high-resolution geographic distributions. The constant screening of various information sources in real time is thus adding value to this approach and makes it an important tool for disease surveillance. Predictive models, predictive mathematical models for epidemics are very key in understanding the course of the epidemic and to plan effective control strategies. So one commonly used model is called the SIR, which means here susceptible, infected, recovered. SIR model for human-to-human transmission, which describes the flow of individuals through three mutually exclusive stages of infection: susceptible, infected, and recovered. Researchers have extended this to an SEIR model, which is susceptible, exposed, infectious, and removed model, to compute risk perception and cumulative number of cases. There are other computational outcomes which may include effects of delays of diagnosis of the disease and comparison of outcomes on different based on completely different containment policies. So the outcomes would depend on the initial parameters in the model, and the parameters could be as mentioned here, SEIR, SIR, and there are a number of other models as well, which are epidemiological models that are predicting the disease outcomes. On the other hand, predictive analytics and big data have become powerful tools for combating the spread of the virus. Intelligent machine learning based systems are being developed that sift through data available on social media to determine the chances of disease occurrence. In another instance, machine learning is being used to profile individuals' predisposition to the disease based on comorbidities and the history of illness. Machine learning and NLP are together being used to review disparate data and information from various sources, including patient records, social media, public health data, and link them to generate insights into disease characteristics and occurrence patterns. And AI technology, again, going back to the previous talk, is assisting researchers to understand the movement patterns of coronavirus based on movement of population. It's helping researchers understand how the virus might behave in different conditions, and also to understand the potential drug targets that might lead to a proper treatment. So now we can kind of gauge, sorry, just give me a second. The power has gone off. Yeah. So we understand that the scientists are operating within a lot of limitations, but the work has been going on to characterize COVID-19 and gain some degree of familiarity with the virus and its effect on us. And every day, more data is being made available, helping researchers update and improve the hypothesis and train the algorithms better with more representative data sets. Now, looking back from where we are, end of June, we can list some of the major milestones that have been made achievable through the application of data science, modeling, and AI. These, the best of these would be the following. So AI-assisted prediction of structure of the virus, which has already saved scientists months of experimentation. Machine learning algorithms that have been making information accessible to researchers instead of having them scan through volumes of data and scientific publications. And the use of machine learning and NLP algorithms in creating a database of critical questions that provides immediate response to researchers and medics free-form queries. So before we end this session, I'd like to visit some key insights to summarize the discussion. We are aware that that data available for any analysis on COVID-19 is noisy, incomplete, and as a result, the initial hypotheses are subject to very frequent revisions. Because of this, for predicting spread of the disease, traditional epidemiological models are being preferred by researchers to AI algorithms. And at present, AI is being put mostly to use for accelerating diagnosis and prognosis. Examples can be seen in AI-enabled diagnosis of chest radiography images and comorbidity-based mortality risk predictions. Also, a main case in point is the application of AI in speeding up drug discovery research. But over the course of time, as we get more data on patients, populations, and the disease, the toolkit of data science and artificial intelligence will collectively empower policies, detection and prevention, diagnosis and treatment outreach with increasing accuracy and speed, which will in turn inform strategic decision-making and reduce the overall time to action, which is critical for preventing the spread of the disease and treating patients at the right time. Well, that's all for me in today's session. I hope you found the information useful. Thank you for your attention. Sorry for the drilling noise. And please stay tuned for the next speaker. Thanks a lot. Swayam, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Anusha. Great. So next we have Adarsha with us. So Adarsha has brought an interesting talk where he'll show an insights and highlights towards the various AI applications you can find around you, which are being used to detect, tackle, and prevent this COVID pandemic. So Adarsha, over to you.
Hey, hi, Swam. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. Very good morning. Let me just quickly share my screen. Okay, you all can see my screen, right?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, cool. So my name is Adarsh. I am a lead data scientist at Indegene Omnipresence. have over 6-7 years of experience into machine learning, AI, and NLP and related fields. I'm also an author. I have published a book on natural language processing with APRIS recently. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly go through a few of the applications, or we can say use cases, wherein how we will use those use cases or applications to come out of COVID-19 pandemic, right? Just a second. Yeah. I think it doesn't require a context, right? So this is, everyone knows what is COVID-19 and how it is basically spreading, and it's people are dying around it, right? So it's close to 3% people are dying because of whoever gets infected, right? So it's pretty huge, and even the spread is really huge. So how do we actually find the challenges, detect those challenges, and how do we come out of that successfully is what we want to see, right? And how do we use not only AI, how do we use technology to come out of it, right? So basically, I would categorize into 3 different categories, right? So basically, what are the ways we can tackle COVID-19, right? To start with, it's basically the biggest challenge is detecting itself, right? There are a lot of it's so challenging because everyone knows, right? It takes like a week to close to 4 to 5 weeks to even get you those symptoms, right? And how do we successfully detect that, okay, the particular human has COVID-19, right? That itself is a challenge to deal with, right? And let's say you have detected that, right? And the next biggest challenge is the spread, right? It's so dangerous because the spreading is really fast, right? And it's through so many ways, right? And when compared to other viruses as well, the spreading has been crazy, right? So how do we sort of solve this spreading problem as well, right? And last but not the least, the treatment to finding the vaccine and the cure itself, right? As Anushka and Anthony discussed, there are a lot of researches going on in that area as well. But again, that is a different problem to solve altogether, right? So now, so use again, you cannot go step by step. All these 3 things should go parallelly, and we should be able to find solutions, effective solutions, actually, to come out of it. So let's just probably go through what industry is doing in 3 different areas, and what are the different applications, or how we are using AI to sort of deal with these 3 right? I can see some. Okay, cool. So through detection, right? So basically, of course, you go to you do a COVID testing, and you find you can get to know whether positive or negative, right? That is always there, right? But how AI can help, or how machine learning can help, is basically if you can even in the initial stages of a patient, right? Let's say you are like 1 or 2 days into COVID, and can we sort of predict that, okay, this particular human being will get COVID in near future, in 7 days, 10 days, 15 days, right? That will eventually solve a lot of problems, right? Even if you can say that, okay, with certain probability that this human is will going to infect, right? So we can we can quarantine him, we can do a lot of other things. We can start the treatment as soon as possible. So there are n number of things that can be done, but the challenge is how do we get to know that, right? So, and as Anusha rightly mentioned, we have been using AI to sort of read and analyze X-rays, right? So we have been doing, and now that with all the systems were set up, it was easy to do it for COVID-19, right? You basically take the X-rays of these patients, and again, we know that it basically affects the lung, right? So it directly attacks there, right? So if we have those lung X-rays, right, we should be able to see how to somehow to predict that whether he will get an infection or not, right? And also not only X-rays, so we will have a probability of infection through other features as well, right? So with his other kind of blood test maybe, and any other possible test that usually that will be carried out, right? So probably his location, right, and probably is he in the city area, is he in the urban or rural, like you consider you are data science, right? You know it, right? You basically build a huge number of features and sort of come up with what is the probability that the particular particular human will be infected or not, right? So that's the important take here, right, to detect the virus, right? And also the couple of use cases that we have again seen in other places is like using the thermal sensors, right? To detect, again, we know that the patients will get fever, and that can be detected with the thermal sensors, and again we can avoid them to go into crowded places to travel, and we can quarantine them, right? So that is another way of dealing things, right? And last but not the least, so we have recently Indian Institute of Science, the AI team there has developed a app where it can analyze the noise, right, the voice basically, right, and try to predict whether he's infected or not, right? Again, coming back to where it affects is basically your lung, right? And there will be a change in the voice, right? The frequency, the distortion, there will be change to a normal person and an infected person, and you can basically detect that well through the voice as well, right? So all these things matters because the nature of the disease itself, right? Because you will not get to know that you are infected probably until 15 days, 20 days, or a month, right? So if we are able to detect like initial at least 3 to 4 days, right, that will really help to stop the spread, right? So that's on the detect part of it, right? Coming to the spread, right? How do we basically stop the not stop the spread? At least if you know how it's where it is going to attack next, right? So there are a lot of models already in place to basically do a risk prediction using the travel history, right? And how an infected person is traveling from places to places, and how many what's the population of that place, and how much of a risk it can create to that particular area, right? So, and also the another key aspect is, again, all these things were already there, right? For example, a robot which was already there, right? And drones, right? And we have been able to quickly adopt to these technologies, right? So that we were able to stop the spread to some extent. Of course, it is spreading, but you cannot make it zero, right? So we are able to reduce the effect because of these kind of semi-autonomous applications or tools, right? For example, they can be used in hospitals, they can be used in delivering things, and they'll be helping in doctors. There are so many ways it can be used, but that's how it's been helping us to reduce the spread, right? And again, last but not least, the social distancing, right? and certain things that we had to bring in place to avoid the spread, and one being social distancing, right? So I think we will be in next session, Swayam and Pratik will walk us over how it's actually done, right, in real time, and social distancing is one of them, right? Last but not the least, treatment. I think Anthony beautifully explained how it's being done, right? How we are able to use the technology and also the domain knowledge and to solve to speed up the process, right? To speed up the drug development process, and that's the key to the treatment, right? So it has to be fast, right? And so even the DeepMind division has used its algorithms to sort of find out the proteins, right, that the virus has, so that the development will be faster, right? And repurpose, right? Again, even Anthony mentioned this, right? So we are trying to see already, like there are already FDA approved drugs where we can treat the pandemic, right? And see which, again, there will be like thousands and lakhs of drugs, right? And how do we see that which one is the most matching one, right? Again, for that matching purpose, so we would be using again AI to see which one would be the more which drug will might most likely to help us in treating the virus, right? So these are the couple of things. I mean, this is not the exhaustive list anyway, right? But just want to give you the quick heads up, and we will now solve the social distancing problem, right? I think again everyone knows the context, right? That we have to sort of maintain a distance amongst ourselves so that we will stop the spreading, right? And how do we do it, right? And how do we solve this problem? How do we use the deep learning algorithms behind, and to come out of this, I'll hand over to Swayam and Pratik to solve this for us.
Sure.
Yeah, that's.
Thanks, Darshan. So let me share my screen now. Right. So what we'll do now, so we'll quickly have a glance about understanding some basic key terms which are involved in doing social distancing, right? And then we'll talk in detail about how the algorithm actually works, what are the key principles and the techniques we use, and then we'll do a hands-on session using the Python. So our friend Pratik will help us to understand how do we do it practically, and we'll have a, so you can either use your camera or we'll also share a recorded video. Either of them you can use to make it on your side as well. Okay. So let's get started, right? So we all know what is social distancing, right? So what is the purpose of social distancing here? So the purpose of social distancing, so the government and the authorities have started imposing social distancing with an idea to stop community spread, right? So this community spread will help us to open the places more effectively and safely, right? So we see that so there was a latest news when a liquor shop was opened, and then lots of people started coming to the place without maintaining social distances, and people has to again implement the lockdown, right? So social distancing helps us to segregate and keep safety in the society. And with this, when you think of social distancing, right? So if you think of an AI tracking and human and detecting human, the first thing is coming to our mind is that it should be able to detect the pedestrians, right? It should be able to detect humans in the frame. And to do so, what we do, we use object detection models to identify humans in the frame. Now in computer vision, you must have been prominently heard of like image classification. So image classification task is like a hello world problem for computer vision. So now there is a difference between image classification and object detection, right? So if you look into this image here, right, on the left hand side, you can see there is a cat, right? So if it was a problem of image classification, the AI will help you to identify what is the object present in the image. Okay, but object detection will help you to identify as well as localize where the object is present in the image. So you can see there is a bounding boxes being made, which is nothing but an anchor box for a reference. So these anchor box, we also call them as a region of interest, right? So these are the anchor box on which first machine tells like, okay, there is an object present in that, and then it also identifies what is the object present. And similarly, if you apply this object detection technique to a video, right, to a video frame, it is called object tracking. So here you can see on the right hand side, we have a video frame. So this video frame, you can see there is it is identifying and recognizing the objects in real time. So this is an object detection model, which is so called as YOLO. YOLO stands for you only look once. So it is able to recognize the objects in real time. And based on your use cases, your task, you can take these bounding boxes and develop an application on top of it, right? So this is how it works. Now, if you talk about what are the generalized steps, how does this object detection algorithm work using deep learning? So these are the straightforward steps you can see. So first we take an input image, right? So once we have the image, the thing is that generally in machine learning, you will see that if you are using computer vision, there is lots of manual rigorous stuff where you manually identify what are the contours, what are the picture histogram values, right? And various other features has to be handcrafted. But here, what in deep learning we do, we use a proposed method of CNN. So we use something called as region-based CNN. So this region-based CNN helps us to generate multiple images, multiple sub-segments, right? So it generates multiple sub-segments of the image. And then we use this technique, combines these sub-segments based on the similarities of their color, texture, shape, and size, right? So you can see below there is 3 images. On the left-hand side, there is a black and white image, which is nothing but consider for you a raw image. Then you feed this image to a region-based CNN. So this region-based CNN helps you to identify all the contours in the area, right? You can see these segments. These are the sub-segments it proposes, it extracts, and then based on its similarity and same texture, we combine it to generate a larger portion of it. So these larger portions of the semantics are nothing but our object location, which we also call it as region of interest, right? So what we do, we pass these region of interest to the CNN network, right? We pass this network to our CNN network and classify them into various classes. Once we have classified them into various classes, we combine all our final obtained result to get our final prediction. So on the right hand side, you can see there is an image. We pass this image to a convolution net. So this convolution net is nothing but our region-based CNN. So this helps us to identify our ROIs. So ROIs is nothing but the anchor, the features, the locations in which object is present. These features are then fed through a ROI pooling layer. So these are, so as you can imagine, these anchor boxes will be of different dimensions, will be of different shape, right? Some will be say 100, 200, 300 and with a variability. So these features has to be brought to a same shape, right? And that's how we understand that the convolution fully connected layer works, right? Because fully connected layer has to have a fixed dimension for all the inputs. So we use a pooling layer with a max technique to solve it. And then we pass this fully connected layer to 2 functions. So one is a linear function, another is a non-linear function. So we use softmax, we use softmax as a non-linear function to classify what is the object present, right? So it will classify the probability based on your number of classes. And then on the other side, it will also predict the XY coordinate, right? So it's a regression loss. So it will predict the XY coordinate of your object. So given the image, you will be able to get predict the anchor box and also what is the object present in that box. So that's how in an end-to-end flow object detection works. Now, if you look around, there are various open source algorithms and models available, right? So you can see on the image I have brought around some accuracy graph. So here you can see there are different graphs like region-based CNN, SSD like single shot multi-bot detection, and then YOLO model like and fast RCN, right? So these are the various state-of-art model available for object detection tasks. When you say state-of-art, so state-of-art in a sense means that the performance of algorithm, the AI is equivalent to the human intervention, right? So the way so ideally you always see there is a 5% of error as an acceptable error for humans. So we see the machine works equivalently the same. And the values, what you can see here, these values are ranging from 70 to 80. So these values signifies your mean average precision. So what is the average precision of your final trained model? So if you see, the range is very well in similar scale, and deciding on what your use case is, what your computation is, you can leverage any of these model as they are available in pre-trained. So these models are available in pre-trained in various deep learning libraries, as we know, like PyTorch, Caffe, TensorFlow, right? So we will be leveraging a pre-trained model. And for our task here, in terms of social distancing, we will be using SSD model. So this SSD model is a very lightweight model which gives a very high throughput in terms of frames per second, FPS, right? So we decide to use this SSD model, which was discovered back in 2015. So actually 2015 was actually the ImageNet movement, right? So the ImageNet movement, in the sense machine were actually being able to generalize for various tasks, right, for the object detection. And today's date, in 2020, last month, we have this YOLO new version coming in. So there has been continuous enhancements going on in this field. Now to talk about more this SSD model, right? So what is this SSD model? So SSD stands for single shot multi-box detector. So single shot means that, so there are two tasks here, right? So as we have looked previously, there is one task of identifying the anchor box, the predicting the anchor box, as well as the second task of categorizing what object it belongs to, right? So single shot in a sense means we just do a forward pass, right? So we just make a forward pass and it does both object localization and classification. Then we have multi-box, which signifies the principle that we use class agnostic bonding boxes prediction technique, right? So we have a regression loss function at a large to helps us predict the XY values, and then of course the detector, as the name suggests, right? So we are doing the detection of the objects. So that's what the significance of single shot multi-box detection is. And to understand more, you can look into this image below, right? So if you see there, we have a cascading kind of an architecture where we have a mobile net plus SSD model, right? So what is this mobile net? So in general, if you have worked in computer vision, you must have been known of VGG16. So VGG16 is a very backbone model which helps you to do the feature engineering, right? Which helps you to extract the features. That's how these features represents what is actually present. These are the same features what we generally used to do handcrafted while using computer vision techniques, right? So generally, MobileNet is an enhanced version of VGG16. So we use this MobileNet and feed an image, say cross 300 cross 300. We feed this image through this MobileNet model, and it will extract various ROIs. It will extract various region of interest from the given image, and we feed this region of interest again to an SSD model, which helps us to classify them, right? So ultimately, what you can see at the last, you can see you will have an overall 8732 anchor boxes detected per class, right? So you will have these many anchor boxes, and what we do, we feed these many detections through a non-maximum suppression technique. So there is a technique called as non-maximum suppression. So what this technique will do, this technique will help you to, as you can imagine, there is 8,000 odd anchor boxes. So there will be lots of anchor boxes where the bounding boxes will have a high overlapping. So those high overlapping anchor boxes, we ignore them and create a larger scale of anchor box, which shows our final prediction, right? And with this, if once we have the understanding of how and what object detection model is, let's put it in a single frame, right? So how this object detection will work. So consider or imagine you have an input, right? As we understand, input can be an image, a frame, or your camera feed. This input, the step one is that you pass it through the object detection model, where it is filtered only to train one object. So in our scenario here, we use SSD model. Now SSD model can be trained on either COCOA dataset or ImageNet dataset. Various datasets have very different classes. So based on what pre-trained model you are choosing and what classes it has, you can select the people class from it. So once you have identified, say you feed the image, given the image, say you got two anchor boxes, you identified two humans, two frames, two humans in the frame. Then what we do, from the anchor box, we consider the centroid. So we take the midpoint of these anchor boxes and we compute the Euclidean distance between them. Okay, so why Euclidean distance? Because it works if you are computing distance between two vectors or metrics. Euclidean distance work very well for the lower dimensionality, right? So here, since we have just 3 dimensions, so we use Euclidean distance to compute the distance. And then what we do, so these Euclidean distance, eventually if you compute on the frame, it will be on pixels, right? The value will be represented in pixels. So we apply a transformation technique and we transform these pixel values into centimeter, right? So this technique is known as triangular similarity technique. We'll look into this when we do the hands-on. So basically, we feed the input image, we filter them, we filter only humans in the frame, and then we compute Euclidean distance between them. We convert this distance into the centimeter, and then finally we can, as we know that as per the social distancing norms, there should be less than 2 meters or 200 centimeters or 6 feet between any two humans, right? It should be more than. So we can create a comparison. If the distance is less than, we show that a red bounding box is drawn and system is violated, right? And to summarize all and to talk in detail, this will give you a very clear idea of how the algorithm is working, right? So as we know, first we start by calibrating our camera. So always in a computer vision task, if you are using a monocular camera, so ideally if you have a bicular, it's already a 3D camera, you have a depth to be very well already calibrated. But in monocular camera, what we do, we generally have to map the focal length of the camera. So we need to map the focal length in order to very effectively get that distance in real time. So we talked about, right? We get the pixel value, and then that pixel value is converted into centimeter. So we need to properly calibrate the camera in terms of adjusting its focal length to get its distance, right? So you can look into here. So the formula of focal length is nothing but the height of person, the pixel height, right? So the anchor box height into the distance of person from camera and divided by the height of the person or the object. So we assume here that for calibrating, the default height of the person at 400 centimeter is 165 centimeter. Okay, with this, once we have adjusted the focal length and calibrated the camera, the person may dynamically move away or far from the object. Okay, so again, what we do, we use a triangular similarity technique. So if you want to learn more about this triangular similarity technique, you can look into this Andrew Rose. He has done very good research work on this technique and explain it very well. So this triangular similarity technique helps us to identify in real time what is the depth of the person from the camera. Okay, once we have identified the depth of the person from the camera, then you can see that using the object detection model, we had those anchor boxes, right? So those anchor boxes gave us the x and y coordinate, and the depth of the person from the camera, of the object from the camera, gives us a y-z coordinate. So using this x-y-z coordinate, we compute the Euclidean distance between all the pairs of humans identified. And then if the distance is less than 200 centimeter, we draw a red bounding box, and if it is not, we draw a green bounding box, right? So so let's look into a hands-on session. So Pratik, I request maybe you can share your screen and help us walk through with the code.
Yes, sure. Can you make me the presenter?
Sure, I'll do right away.
So hi everyone, this is Pratik. I am a data scientist at Indegene Medical Technology team. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us for the session for on the weekend. And let's get started. Swam, I am still not getting.
Make presenter.
Yeah.
So you are now the presenter.
Yeah. So hope my screen is visible. Okay.
Not yet, Pratik.
Is it now?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just quickly go over through what Swam explained in theory, how it works in the real world, as in how it works in terms of code. So we are using a VGGNet model. So it has few of the classes that we have. So classes is nothing but what is a particular, if you have identified an object, what object it is. So we have few classes that we have listed down here, which is actually by the model itself, which is like background, aeroplane, bird, boat, and the interesting one, which is our person, to identify whether how far a particular person is from the other, to ensure that he is following the COVID rules, or and maintaining social distancing. So let's quickly go through the code.
I
So the
think
code,
we can share the depot access with the member here in the chat. They can also clone it.
yeah, sure. So I'll give you the code access, which is on GitHub. It is open source, so anybody can clone it and see it. I'm just sharing in the chat. So you can parallelly clone it if you want, or you can do it later. I have written a documentation. You can do it otherwise. So going through the code once again. First of all, the two things that you see here is the confidence threshold and the distance threshold. So confidence threshold is nothing but means how much probable, if you have identified an object, how much probability is there that that particular object is of a particular class. That is, if I have identified a person, an object as a person, then how much probability is that that's the correct one. So this is what I have kept a threshold of 0.85, which is what I have experimented and seen, that 0.85 is some threshold which is works for most of the cases. Distance threshold, we usually keep it as 200, but I have kept it 800 to just show visually how well it works. The class labels are nothing but what I have just shown in the text file, where there were 15 to 16 classes of for which our model is capable of classifying it. Next, coming to the other line, here we are loading the model, that is our Cafenet model. We are initializing the video that we are taking as an input. There is also a utility where you can do it live, and the main logic. What this logic does is essentially that it breaks the image or your video in certain frames, that is of 1 second each, so that you can go to each uh, session, each frame, and identify what object it has. Then comes the focal distance, which is actually what Swam was just explaining about, that we take the triangular similarity. The triangular similarity is what is explained, what is being calculated here, which is nothing but 165 into focal length divided by height. This is the distance that we usually compute to get a distance between a person and the camera, so that we get the exact matches. As we have a limitation that we are visualizing a 3D image through a 2D camera, so that's why we are using this focal distance to calculate. Once we calculate the distance of two particular person from a image, we calculate what is their mean point, as in what is the medium point of that. Once we get the medium point, we get the distance out of it, as in how much far they are. And if they are, as the condition is written, if it is less than distance threshold, then I'll draw a green box, rather than if it's greater than 800, I'll draw a green box. So this is how it works. So let's see for the sample image how it works. I'll just run how the whole script at once. This is an image where people are related, means there are many people coming up on a beach, and the image is calculating, as you just saw that it's showing 800. The distance was less than 800, so it was showing red like this. So there is a limitation of this particular model that we are using, that if two people are walking together, it's not able to correctly identify. This is what has been done from the initial step, that is from 2015 to 2018. The YOLO model has solved. So for the basic purpose, we have kept the SSD model to just explain the whole use case. But if you want to upgrade, you can also use the YOLO model itself. So this is what I have. I think we can
So
quickly go.
yeah, so I would suggest everyone can just try it out, the code on your side.
Right.
If you have already set it up, the libraries and the environment, it will be
Right.
quick if you can. Otherwise, you may try it later.
And we can quickly go to the questions as well. If somebody likes to have a question of the session of this particular use case and how to do it.
So I think there are questions from the audience. So there is Yash asking, Yash Kumar. He's asking, what are the various ways? What is the best in current scenario? I'm not sure in what context he is talking. What is the best ways in the current scenario?
So Yash, can you
Okay.
unmute yourself and give us a short description and tell us what
Hello.
your question is? Yeah. Hey.
Hello. Yeah. So actually, what I am asking was, what is the current scenario? Like, which algorithm is best for this thing? Like, there is a video and various people are going around there. So, which algorithm identifies the correctness, the accuracy level?
So if you
So yes,
assume that pre-trained model, the graph that just Swam showed, the YOLO version, which has come the latest, has proved to be the best one as of now. But depending on the use case, you can develop your own model. Depending on where you want to deploy it, it is very subjective.
yeah.
But
So
in
basically,
general, if you yeah.
yes, to just add on what Pratik said, right? So we understand that these object detection. So you will be seeing there is robots on which this object detection can be applied, whereas in drones also this object detection can be applied, right? So the technique remains same. The only thing with what is differs is your view, your point of view. So according to the point of view, your focal length has to be calibrated with the camera, and rest the functionality remains the same. And as you have seen in the steps, it's just part of the building blocks. You just can replace the building block with the new technique, which is more leveraging for your. So depending what we have shown here, the SSD model is a lightweight model. They can work very well in the low computing power like Raspberry Pis and Jetson Nanos, right? So depending on what your use case, you can select.
Hello? Hello?
Hello,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Have you deployed this model on any edge devices?
We have not yet deployed, but we had just did an experiment, and yeah, it was giving a frame rate. The FPS was around 40, 35 to 40 on Jetson Nano.
If I want to deploy in Jetson Nano, how can I deploy? Can you tell?
So basically, there are lots of open resources available, right? So Jetson Nano is nothing but the CUDA processor. So you can just set up the environment, and the same code what you have seen, you can clone it and try to run it. It will work.
And something that is, I need to change the neural network format of because that is work on Linux.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any need to change the format of neural network?
There are various steps that are involved, from installing the CUDA process, setting it up, and installing the various dependencies that you have. So, if you would like, we can help you out. You can just mail us and we can help you if there is a problem. Because I think that with the limitation that there is, we are not, there are many people who are discussing about. We can get back to you on it personally.
Okay, please help.
Yeah, please, sure. I'll put up my email on Meetup group. You can just ask the questions, mailing us. We can help out.
All right then. So anything else if you want to discuss or ask?
I think Rudra Shekhar was asking some question. Rudra, would you like to discuss it here?
Yeah, my question is why are you taking the constant factor of 165? I understood the focal length and the other bonding box calculation. I'm pretty much interested in why that constant factor.
Right. So, Mr. Rudra, as you have seen that the equation, the focal length equation itself, right? So the parameters, the main parameters, what we have assumed to initially when you need to calibrate, we assume that the height of the person is 165, and we assume and we know that initially for setup that the height of object of the person and the distance of the person, we assume it to be a 400 centimeter. Using these values, you can perceive that the bonding box what you have got on the screen will be of say of around 200 to 50 pixels, right? So that will be the height.
Okay.
And using those values, you compute your focal distance and then.
Okay. Okay. So, but why one suggestion, instead of taking the average person's height, would you not take an constant object and use it? Because you are talking about using this for security camera, and I think it wouldn't change the location, right? Once it is fixed, probably that would have been a better option, is what I feel. Then these numbers would have been more accurate.
Certainly, yes. So since this is a very raw experiment to help you get words with the core concept, right? It can be fine tuned as per the use case and your computer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that answers the question, right?
Yeah, I think I got it. So I was just curious, like, why, how come this constant has come up, and uh, wherever I checked, there is no formula with that particular value. I was wondering, that's all.
Yes. So that's how we calculated. So we used all these parameters to come up with that value.
Okay. And other thing, so what is the accuracy that you've got in classification? Because you had other labels also, but on the video that you've shown, there were no labels that were being identified. It was only showing the
So correct. So as you can see in the code there, we have filtered it only for objects. So given the frame, it only identifies the object, and within
okay,
the
so you're not putting the
correct.
bounding boxes for you're providing bounding boxes only for person or object with label person, and then putting it. Okay.
Sure.
And one other observation I had is, like, I'm not sure if you're doing multiple object detection in that.
It will serve that as well, right? You can do multiple object detection as well. These are very common depending on what model you use. So instead of SSD, you can use YOLO, and so it solves that multi detection for sure.
Okay.
Right, but the only condition that we put up is that we have filtered out with the person, so that it just identify persons which is relevant for social distancing.
Okay, great. One request I have to all of you is that I hope you must have been filled that form, right? So we have shared one form which deep learning guys have sent us. So you I request you can just fill up that form. That will help you to receive that promo codes. So we will share the promo codes as per the email ID you have provided on the forms. So maybe you can just submit that form, and yes, there will be also a review form shared with you. So your feedbacks are welcome, which will help us to enhance and improve what you want to hear and what you want to learn. So accordingly,
and yeah, one more question, Swayam. I don't want to hold up for too long.
Sure.
See, you've used a mobile net, right? And so I wanted to understand any reason for using this. Is it only for looking at low compute devices, or
Yes. So the ultimate purpose was to target on low computing devices, because you cannot have these applications devices on cloud. And ideally, this mobile is an enhanced version of VGG 16 and works very well with SSD model. So that's the combination what we see.
Yes. By the way, do you know what is the accuracy of top one detection for this?
So we have kept a threshold. So accuracy, what you can see overall, if you see the high, it will be having a high precision, which you can see will be generalizing to over 80. So
right.
Okay, yeah, because you have provided a threshold of point is 0.85. So anything beyond that would be what it would identify and do the bounding boxes. But
Yeah,
overall,
that is done. That is done on the basis of the ROC curve that we draw up and decide of which is the best threshold. So when we draw the ROC curve, we found that this is the best one that is working for us, for humans actually, specifically.
Okay.
So that's
And
why.
the other thing was your frame speed looked slower for me, slower than the normal speed. So was there a specific reason that you looked, or is it because the
I have
model was
kept is a wait time which I have increased. You can decrease it and it will work the way it should.
okay? Still, it will be able to identify with a good, reasonable accuracy, right?
Right. It will. It was just done so that matlab everybody can relate and see each frame very slowly.
Okay. Because I'm just looking at considering the case of practical implementation or deployment, in which case monitoring would be a
Exactly.
bigger task. A lot of lag would be there in case if you transit so.
No. It works like a pro if you do reduce the wait time. So
Okay.
that is what we have to say. Thank you.
But by the way, it's a good job. Good job done. I think it's a good use case relevant to the current times.
Thank you very much.